Hello there, it's Trev again, back for another kind of a special edition of films that I own that I haven't watched yet. It's not actually a special edition, I am still watching films that I own that I haven't watched yet, but in this episode I sort of go through a bit of a tangent. I didn't pick them at random out the box, I chose these films and they sort of link from one to the next. Yeah, it all started when I'd watched It's a Wonderful Life over Christmas, which is a film that I own that I have watched many times before. But I do enjoy that film, and I do enjoy watching James Stewart. Or should I say Jimmy Stewart? Or Mr. Stewart. I bet he'd like to be called Mr. Stewart. I haven't seen any of his westerns. I've seen all of his sort of Hitchcock films. Not all of them. Probably. I don't know. I've seen Rope, Rear Window. And was he in Vertigo? I've seen a few anyway. Never seen his westerns, but I hadn't seen a lot of his sort of romantic comedies, and I quite like him as George Bailey in It's a Wonderful Life. You know, and that was also directed by Frank Capra. Well, I knew I had a Jimmy Stewart film, another Jimmy Stewart Frank Capra film in my collection, and that was Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. So here is the case for Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. The front is a big picture of Jimmy Stewart's face, looking very sort of wholesome. And then in front of that is him looking sort of bedraggled with what seems like letters in his hand, lots of letters, and letters at his feet, and he looks run down. And it says, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, and then Double Dealing in DC. Directed by Frank Capra, It's a Wonderful Life. The back cover goes on to say, in this excellent comedy, the naive but likeable Jefferson Smith, James Stewart, finds himself in the unlikely situation of serving the remaining term of office of a senator who's died. But Washington is filled with powerful and sometimes corrupt people, not least senior Senator Joseph Payne, Claude Rains, a friend of Jefferson's late father. It transpires that prior to Jefferson's rise to power, the suave Senator Payne had it all his own way and subsequently believes he should have little problem in manipulating the green Jefferson to do exactly as he desires in his bid to control who would benefit from lucrative contracts. Little did he realise, however, the resolve of Jefferson Smith, who on finding out about the untrustworthy Payne, undertakes to stop his little game. A superbly directed Frank Capra comedy played to perfection by the unforgettable Jimmy Stewart. 1939, filmed in black and white. So was this the year before It's a Wonderful Life? I thought It's a Wonderful Life was 1940. 1946? So it was a long time after. So yes, this was before It's a Wonderful Life. So I've already watched it. So I'm just sort of going to try and remember the film with the help of Wikipedia to sort of go through the plot. So it starts off with the death of a senator, and Hubert Happy Hopper has to pick a replacement for the recently deceased US Senator, Sam Foley. Happy Hopper is played by Guy Kibbe, not an actor I recognise. I haven't watched a lot of these old black and white films, but I do quite enjoy them when I do watch them. It's a nice sort of watch this in between Christmas and New Year. Is a nice sort of sofa day. The kids was all off doing something else. The wife was in her office room doing something else, and I thought, I'm going to just watch this film. But yeah, Hopper, it's a great scene where he wants to choose someone. He's after picking a stooge. But then Jim Taylor, who is played by Edward Arnold, he's like a corrupt political boss, and he comes in and pressures Hopper to try and pick someone that he wants to run. Now, I sort of got the idea, but I didn't follow quite who's who. But I did like the scene when Hopper goes back to his house and he's having dinner around his dinner table with his sons, all the children, and all the children start telling him, oh, you should select Jefferson Smith. And they're all saying it. And it's this really funny scene where he's sort of outnumbered by his kids. And he thinks, oh, that could be a good person to put in there, someone green. And then there's a scene where he goes into his office and he flips a coin to decide whether he's going to go for Taylor's choice or his own choice. And the coin lands on its edge And he's sort of like, oh. But it lands right next to a newspaper article that sort of is all about Smith. So then he decides there and then, I'm going to just choose Smith. So he chooses Smith, and then enter Jim Stewart. Now, Jimmy Stewart comes in, he's naive, he's keen, he's going to change the world. It reminded me very much of Yes, Minister. I don't know if you ever saw that old series, but it's very similar, where he comes in and he's got all these ideas of where he's going to take his job and what he's going to do and what powers he's going to sort of show. Obviously, nothing works out the way that he planned. There's so much corruption and that in Washington that he soon has the rug pulled out from under his feet. Now, he strikes up a relationship with his, I suppose she's his secretary, is she? And he's sort of working in cahoots with Senator Payne, who, as it said on the back of the cover, was Smith's late father's friend. I didn't write any notes. This is the trouble. So I'm trying to work my way through this. So yeah, he befriends his secretary, Clarissa Sanders, played by Jean Arthur. Again, which doesn't mean anything to me. The only person I recognised in this was the chap that Clarissa Sanders is working alongside in the media, in the press, and I was like, that's the uncle out of It's a Wonderful Life. So he's obviously an actor who works a lot with Frank Capra. I suppose the more films of this ilk that I watch, the more I will recognise these people. But they decide, Smith sort of comes up with this idea where he's going to loan some land for a national boys camp, which will be paid back by youngsters across America, and then donations pour in, and it looks like it's going to work. But what unfolds is that this land that he's promised is also land where they're going to build a dam. This is where the corruption takes place, because people are sort of being paid, to get this scheme through, and he just comes straight in and sort of knocks this for 6. But that's where they start to try and knock him down, and they set him up and make out that he owns this land and it's all a big scam just for him to make money. And no matter how hard he tries to get his word out, Jim Taylor, the political boss, owns the newspapers basically, and he's getting his story out all the time, and they're just running Smith into the ground. Now, this is where I sort of lost what was going on, but he sort of takes to the Congress. They're in Congress, which is sort of like our parliament, isn't it? And he gets up to speak and he won't sit down, so he's basically keeping the room. I don't understand quite what the politics is here. I'm not into American politics at all, but it's called a filibuster, and he launches a filibuster to postpone the bill and prove his innocence on the Senate floor. And that's the whole big scene, is him at the end standing there. I think he's supposed to have stood there for over 24 hours, and he's getting more tired as it goes on. And as it's going, he's trying to get his side of the story out, and he uses the Boy Scouts to print their papers and go out. And then you see sort of like mobs of grown men going around and beating up the Boy Scouts basically, and knocking them off their bikes and burning all their newspapers that they're selling. It's a great film. Like I say, it lost me a bit with the politics of it all, and the ending seemed a bit rushed. It was a feel-good ending, I suppose, but I didn't believe completely the way the villain of the piece is the sort of the villain the whole way through, and then at the very last minute can just change. And actually, yeah, no, you're right. But, they needed to wrap the film up somehow. But that was Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Sorry, I bumbled my way through that. Anyway, after I watched Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, I felt like watching something a bit more Christmassy. And I knew I had another James Stewart film called The Shop Around the Corner, which seemed to be more of a romantic comedy. So I thought, I'm going to watch this. Next day, I grabbed it off the shelf. And the cover, The Shop Around the Corner, starring Margaret Sullivan and James Stewart, and 1940, so the year after Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. The back cover says, tell bickering Budapest gift shop workers Alfred and Clara that they love each other and they might call you crazy. No lovers can compare to the romantic secret pen pals, each known only as dear friend. What Alfred and Clara don't know, of course, is that they are each other's dear friend. In the third of their 4 luminous screen pairings, Margaret Sullivan and James Stewart star in this Valentine love wrapped in the ribbon of director Ernst Lubitsch's trademark touch. Wit instead of buffoonery. Sentiment instead of sentimentality, affection instead of attitude. As enchanting today as it was yesterday, the shop around the corner was breezily updated to the electronic age when Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan clicked together in You've Got Mail. In any age, your patronage will be cheerfully rewarded. So you can see where it's going from here. My next link, they just mentioned in the cover there, is You've Got Mail, which is another DVD that I own that I haven't watched yet. But anyway, so I didn't realise until watching this that Margaret Sullivan and James Stewart, then this is their 4th outing together. So it might be worth looking into other films that they've done. But at the moment, we are just going to talk about The Shop Around the Corner. Now, The Shop Around the Corner, as it says, directed by Ernst Lubitsch, based on a play, I think, or an old book. It said it was based on something. It's an old MGM romantic comedy, and I did think it was great from start to finish. James Stewart plays Alfred Kralik, who's a top salesman at the leathergoods shop in Budapest, owned by the high-strung Mr. Hugo Matacek, played by Frank Morgan, who I did recognise as I was like, oh, that's the Wizard, how the Wizard of Oz. I recognise someone. Huzzah! So it starts off the opening scene. They're all arriving for work to go into the shop, and you see James Stewart turn up and full of his own self-importance. He seems, he's a bit of a job's worth, but in a kind way, I suppose. He's got a friend, Pirovich, played by Felix Bressart, who sort of looks a bit like Groucho Marx. That's what I thought it was for a while, but it's not. He's sort of a kind character. He's got a family, but he's a bit of a try-hard as well. Always trying to sort of brown nose Mr. Matacek, but it always ends up going wrong. But he's good friends with James Stewart anyway. They get on really well. Then there's another character called Vadas, who's, you see at the beginning, he's a bit smarmy, and when he's waiting there, he looks down his nose at people and he's a bit full of himself. And as the story develops, he is sort of conniving. He's a bit of a backstabber. You don't trust him, and none of the other characters sort of trust him. Then there's a couple of the saleswomen there as well, but the funniest character was the delivery boy, Pepe Katona, played by William Tracy. Now, he was sort of so cocksure of himself. They send him on these like errands here and there. I can't even remember why he was so funny, but there was scenes that just he did sort of crease me up as the film went on. Anyway, as they're working in this shop, Matacek sort of has this musical cigar box turns up, and he's like, oh, what do you think of this? And Jimmy Stewart's like, no, don't sell that, it's awful. And Matacek's a bit sort of taken back. He's like, oh, I want to buy it, but he sort of relies on Jimmy Stewart to be honest, and they have this sort of good rapport. And then Margaret Sullivan turns up as Clara Novak, and she's looking for a job, and she asks James Stewart, and he's like, no, there isn't any jobs. But then Matacek comes in and observes her selling a woman one of these musical cigar boxes that Jimmy Stewart said will never sell. And Matacek watches this, sees her do such a good job that he gives her a job. So now they're working together, and this is where their relationship starts to sort of thicken. By this point, we've already mentioned as well that Jim Stewart has sort of told Pirovich about his letter, that he's got this pen pal and he's fallen in love with this woman. He's talked about that. And it's a little while into the plot before we realise that it's Margaret Sullivan. You realise, but they don't let you know for a little while that it's her. So they've got this rivalry going on, and then she sort of talks to one of the other girls in the shop and says, "Oh, I've been writing these letters." So then it becomes clear. It all leads up to the point where Jimmy Stewart goes to meet her and then realises that it's her waiting in this restaurant with a flower in her lapel or something. And he's disappointed, but he thinks he'll go in there and try to talk to her. And he goes in there and they just insult each other. They fall out. And she's like, "Can you just leave?" And he sort of hangs around, loiters around the shop. And she thinks that she's ruined her chances. But apart from that, there's other little storylines going on. There's enough to keep you occupied. There's storylines behind the scenes. Like Matacek, he gets a bit disgruntled with Jimmy Stewart. And you don't know what it's all about. And then him and Jimmy Stewart sack each other. He sacks Jimmy Stewart, and you're thinking, what's all this about? And then the delivery boy again, Peppy, he sort of turns up and saves the day, helps to find out what's going on, and he saves the day, and he's promoted, and he gets Jimmy Stewart's job back. It's good fun, but again, as I said with Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, the end of this film seemed to be quite rushed as well, where Jimmy Stewart knows it's her, but she doesn't know it's him, and he's sort of leading her along. And he says, "Oh, I met your date come in earlier." She's like, wants to buy him, I think she wants to give him the cigarette box. And he's telling her, no, give him a wallet. And she's not taking any, why should I listen to you? And then he says, "Oh, your date turned up." And he sort of tells her that he was a bit of a loser and he was hopeless. And he says all these things. I think he says he lives with his mum or something, and he's overweight and smells and stuff like that, just to see her reaction. But then when he finally reveals to her that it's him, they sort of kiss, and then it ends straight away. And it's a very rushed ending. I don't know if this is how they used to end films. I mean, there's no end credits. All the credits come at the beginning. So it does end, and it's the end, and that's it. But despite that, I really, really did enjoy this film. It was just great fun. Quite nice direction. It was, it's all set in and around this shop, really. It's just easy watching. Good fun. Good performances. Yeah, real heartwarming. I liked it. But then, as I said, it led me on then to want to go and watch You've Got Mail. So, Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan in a film by Nora Ephron. So, You've Got Mail is a remake of the Shop Around the Corner. Meg Ryan's shop in this shop is actually called the Shop Around the Corner, so it's a bit of a wink to the Shop Around the Corner. Nora Ephron, I haven't seen a lot of her films. She's done Sleepless in Seattle. She wrote When Harry Met Sally, which I have seen and I absolutely love. I do love When Harry Met Sally. It's one of my favourite romantic comedies. So she wrote When Harry Met Sally. I think it was Rob or Carl Reiner, one of the Reiners, directed When Harry Met Sally. But by this point in her career, she is directing. I think she did direct Sleepless in Seattle as well, which I've not seen. I'm sure it's just as good. She's good at writing these sort of relationships that are cursed but turn out all right in the end. So You've Got Mail, basing on what I know about When Harry Met Sally, seems a good choice for Nora Ephron. Anyway, You've Got Mail, this is the cover, delivers all the wit, charm and warmth you'd expect from a reunion of the stars, Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan, and director Nora Ephron of Sleepless in Seattle. Greg Kinnear, Parker Posey, Gene Stapleton and more talented co-stars add perfect support to this Valentine to modern, to modem romance, in which superstore book chain magnate Hanks and cozy children's bookshop owner Ryan are anonymous email cyber pals who fall head over laptops in love, unaware they are combative business rivals. You've got rare Hollywood magic when you've got mail. So, You've Got Mail. How does it compare to The Shop Around the Corner? It was strange to watch it. There were a few similarities, but You've Got Mail felt completely like a Nora Ephron film. It felt like When Harry Met Sally. It had the same sort of New York relationship thing going on. I know When Harry Met Sally, Carrie Fisher's in that as one of the friends, and Bruno Kirby, and they've got this banter between each other. Well, in this, you see Meg Ryan as the bookshop owner. She's in a relationship with Greg Kinnear, who I always think is great fun anyway. She owns this little kooky bookshop. Greg Kinnear is a writer who's very opinionated, and he sort of puts her down quite a lot and tells her what she should and shouldn't like. And he likes her shop because it's just a sort of a quaint little shop, and he's a very, he's against the internet, and he thinks it's going to ruin the world, and he's sort of very tied in his beliefs of the older generation, of old things. Stuck in his ways is what I'm trying to say. Fucking hell, Triff, spit it out. And Tom Hanks is the son of a corporate sort of chain store bookstore owner called Fox, and Dave Chappelle is his mate. So you've got the relationships. He's in a relationship with quite a stern, cutthroat sort of businesswoman, and Dave Chappelle is his friend who he sort of discusses things through with. And Meg Ryan sort of chooses her friend, is played by Posey Parker. So they've got the people that they can talk with and rely upon for, airing their grievances. But unlike the shop around the corner, You've Got Mail, they go into a lot more detail of the relationship. You see their emails to each other, and it really is quite an insight into their characters, and it makes a lot more sense because the shop around the corner, they sort of touch on some of the topics of the letters, whereas in this, you can really see them getting to know each other and getting to understand each other. And then by the time that Tom Hanks realises who she is, he works it out first. It's the same scene as in the shop around the corner where he goes to meet her and realises it's her, and then he goes in and she's taking his advice from his emails. She basically unloads on him because her shop is about to close down, her business that's been her life, and she has sort of been confided in Tom Hanks via emails. They don't know each other. She's shop girl and he's like NY152. So she's been confiding in him, and he's reflecting on what's happening between him and her in real life and the guilt of it. He's telling shop girl, yeah, you should deal with it like this. So when he finally meets her, she's completely taking his advice and she deals with it like that. And she's really horrible to him, and it sort of knocks the wind out of his sails a bit. But he goes off and they still stay in communication, and he sort of now has the upper hand and he leads her along. But just like When Harry Met Sally, it's got great sort of realistic relationships. Tom Hanks is great to watch. Meg Ryan, she's played this role before. I suppose he has as well in Sleepless in Seattle. This is their third film together. I think they was both in Joe versus the Volcano as well. So they're both, they're good for the roles. They're both easy to watch. But yeah, I did think that this You've Got Mail, I watched it with my wife, and it was easy going. It was good fun. I don't mind a romantic comedy. It's not usually what I'd leap at, but there is something about Nora Ephron, the late Nora Ephron. I think she passed away, didn't she? But she's great at writing people, and you see the flaws. No one's perfect. You really get inside their characters, and you can see their weaknesses, their flaws, and yeah, it's good to see them developing the relationship later on, and Tom Hanks deciding, which you pick up that more so than you do in a shop around the corner. Anyway, so then I knew I had another Nora Ephron film on my shelf, and it's a surprising Nora Ephron film, and it is the remake of Bewitched, starring Nicole Kidman and Will Ferrell. Now, when I bought it I actually bought 20 DVDs for £2 from our local tip. And this was one of them. And I remember at the time I bought it, and I thought me and my son watch all the Will Ferrell films. So I thought, I'll buy that just in case he wants to watch it. He didn't. But so I picked up this film, and then as I was reading the credits, I was like, oh, it's Nora Ephron. So I remembered that. And then once I'd watched You've Got Mail, I thought, right, there's one more film and I can finish off my films I own that I haven't watched yet special with one more Nora Ephron film. And it's like a lovely, neat circle of linkage, you know? So anyway, so it's Bewitched. It's the remake of the classic TV sitcom Bewitched, where she wrinkles her nose, tinkle, tinkle, tinkle. But I didn't realise quite what kind of a remake it was going to be. Actually, I'll get into it in a minute. So the cover says, Oscar winner Nicole Kidman, Best Actress in Leading Role of the Hours, 2002, and wickedly funny Will Ferrell, Wedding Crashers, star as actors playing Darren and Samantha on a remake of the television show Bewitched in this cleverly crafted comedy from director Nora Ephron. Sleepless in Seattle, You've Got Mail. Egomaniacal star Jack Wyatt Ferrell casts unknown Isabel Kidman as his co-star in order to monopolise the limelight and regain his top spot on Hollywood's A-list. When Isabel, a real witch, discovers Jack's self-centred scheme, she conjures a side-splitting spell the mere mortal will never forget. So, as we were watching it, and I realised it wasn't a flat-out remake of Bewitched, you know, I did think it wasn't too bad a film, to be honest. It was quite a good concept that they're remaking Bewitched, and Nicole Kidman just happens to be a witch who she doesn't winkle her nose to cast magic, she pulls her ear. But she sort of arrives down to Earth. I don't know where witches come from, but she's called Isabel Bigelow, and her father, Nigel Bigelow, is a sorcerer. Would that be the word? A warlock. So she's a witch and he's a warlock, and he turns up as she sort of made a spell to win this, to get this really nice house and start her life. And she says, I don't want to be a witch, I don't want magic, I want to fall in love, and I want someone to fall in love with me. And Michael Caine's sort of telling her, no, don't do this, it's a mistake, you're a witch, you'll always be a witch. She's convinced that she doesn't want to be. Will Ferrell is this sort of actor whose career is spiralling out of control. He's had 2 flops, and this TV series is going to be his sort of comeback, his last chance, basically, to cling on to something. His agent was played by Jason Schwartzman, who I mainly know from the films of Wes Anderson. But Will Ferrell's character is a real egomaniac, and he wants an unknown cast beside him so that they don't sort of outshine his role. And so obviously Nicole Kidman's character, she starts acting, she falls in love with him because he's exactly the type of person she wants to fall in love with, someone who's messy, someone whose life is spiralling out of control. And he convinces her to star in the sitcom with her. And then as she's sort of in the sitcom, she starts to realise just how egotistical, narcissistic he is. And she gets no lines. And she's sort of like treated like second rate. And even though the character of Samantha that she's playing in this remake of Bewitched is supposed to be the star, she's obviously sort of getting cut out. So she starts to use her magic to sort of ruin his performances. And then her auntie turns up and starts to try and put hexes on him. So there's all these comedic shenanigans going on. And again, you got Will Ferrell with his agent. They've got the sort of, you know, as I mentioned in the last one, Nora Ephron creates quite good relationships between characters. So they've got a lot coming and going. With this one, it felt a lot thinner. It did fit to her Nora Ephron film loosely. And it was good fun, but it wasn't as good or as realistic because it had this fantastic sort of magic subplot. A lot of it just sort of felt forced. It wasn't as believable as When Harry Met Sally or as You've Got Mail. There were a few funny bits in it, but for the most part, it felt a lot of it was a bit of a waste of time. You know, when she goes through all these scenarios to make stuff happen, and then rather than deal with the consequences, she can just rewind time, and then it sort of everything that you've watched becomes undone. And I felt that was a bit disappointing because it's like, oh, that now doesn't feel so realistic. Do you know what I mean? It hasn't dealt with anything. She's just started again. You just about rip the script up and start again, and it felt a bit like that. but it was all right. It was good fun. We watched it with the family and everyone sort of enjoyed it. But yeah, so that was my 4 films. I'm not going to keep going on about it too much, but out of the 4, what would I say was my film of the month? I'm going to give it to The Shop Around the Corner. There was something really endearing about it, although I really did enjoy the remake, You've Got Mail. I just liked the characters and the actors in The Shop Around the Corner. There was lovely, funny moments. It was a nice sort of warm film, even though it ended suddenly and abruptly and perhaps not as effectively as You've Got Mail. This was earlier times, and it's probably closer to its original source material. But yeah, it's nice to be transported back to the 1940s and to watch a film and not be bored by it. A lot of the old films, they can seem a bit sort of long-winded and that, but it was a great little film. I really did enjoy it. So there we go. That was films that I own that I haven't watched yet. Going on a tangent special, I suppose. So, yeah, thanks ever so much for listening. There'll be more films that I own that I haven't watched yet to come, and hopefully more episodes of the WN Movie Talk podcast coming very soon. So, thanks ever so much for listening, and I'll see you all again soon. Good night.